What's happening, everyone? This is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box Podcast. So excited to have you here. So excited to talk about this. This is where the Hebrews become Israelites, and the Israelites become a nation. Now, when we talked about this yesterday, we talked about a large portion of it, actually like the first 15 minutes so the first half of the podcast we talked about, is the Bible a historical document? Well, that I hope to have settled at that point. But remember, I also said in that description that when they're actually writing down what's happening, when it's happening, it's a religious document. Anything before that, again, like everything else, still has to be taken with a grain of salt, but it becomes from oral traditions, which change over time. So, again, grain of salt, take it as much as you can, but when it comes to the Sinai and over that, past that, this is when you can actually say, well, these are actually the books of Moses, as the Torah is, and this was actually written by Moses. Now, was it actually written by Moses? No one actually says who the author is. Was he there during the time when this was written down? That's what the assumption is. So when they're actually in the Sinai, which is after leaving Egypt and coming to the Sinai Peninsula, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Well, while they were wandering at this time, they weren't just nomadic people that were just wandering everywhere. They were probably in certain areas for long, extended period of times. But they did actually move around because they built a temple, and we're going to go into this a little bit. They built a tabernacle, which was a place of worship, a temple, a mobile temple where they could bring it with them as they went around. But here's an interesting thing also. During this time is most likely when Moses actually started writing down, or Moses or whoever started writing down the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. Now, when they're actually writing this down, they would, and this is interesting because a lot of people would say the 10 Commandments is the most important thing to talk about. Well, we're going to go a little bit more into this. Historically, the most important thing is the Bible or the Torah, because it's the Torah that's written all of these other things that are happening as they're moving forward. So this is no longer we're just taking from oral tradition and writing it down, which is what the first 5 books of Moses is partially. But Moses is here. They're going to be writing down everything that happened before and now from then on what was actually happening while it was happening. So let's go a little bit more into this. So they have this chance, this time, when they want to start writing down their oral traditions. They write about the creation. They write about the flood. They write about the Tower of Babel. They write about everything potentially that happened with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel up until that point. So you have like 2,000 years, 1,000 to 2,000 years of writing to take place, all the way up to Exodus. So you have Genesis, which is the first book, which is basically all the old oral traditions written. Oh, I got a headache. Or it's a sorry, it's either so the Genesis is basically the oral traditions. The Exodus is basically what they're living as they're living it. Now, maybe not exactly that time, but afterwards. And the reason why I say afterwards is because they didn't write it down as they were leaving Egypt, trying to get out of there as fast as possible. They wrote it down after, and they remembered everything that was happening. So that's Exodus. So think of it. Genesis is oral tradition. It's what's been passed down in that time. The Exodus is like a recap of what just happened leaving Egypt, and then what's happening going forward, and so on and so forth. Now, everything after this potentially is stuff that's written down as it's happening, and someone's keeping almost like a journal. It's happening. Now, how much of it is actual journal writing, like day to day or month to month, year to year, and how much of it is, hey, last year this is exactly what happened? Don't know. I wish I did. I wasn't there. No archaeologist was there. No historian was there. So we can only go by what we can figure out. So at this point, you have you have Egypt in the back end, in history, the past. The Hebrews are moving forward. So they come to Mount Sinai. Now, again, this comes into the religious part, but it also comes into the culture and laws, which when you're studying archaeology, anthropology, and also history, you need to be able to understand the culture, the religion, and such. And so they actually, according to the Bible, Moses left everything, or left all the people, and went up into the mountain to meet with God, to pray to him, to receive revelation with him, to actually see him. Who knows? We don't know all the things that actually happened up there, because he didn't write down the most sacred things that were happening up there. But what he did write down is that he came back with commandments. Well, during the time that he was up in the Sinai, the people went back to their old ways, the ways that they learned from Egypt, idol worship even. And so when Moses came back, he smashed the tablets that the laws were written on. I'm not going to say the 10 Commandments, the laws that they were written on, and rebuked the people. Well, at that point, they actually repented, asked Moses to go back and to get the laws. When he goes back, now these aren't the same laws. These are a possible lesser laws. Comes back down, brings these laws, the 10 Commandments. The second time it's the 10 Commandments, and teaches the people. So the people, this is interesting to know, the people are set in their ways. The older people, they've learned all these things. They've grown in Egyptian and a mixed culture all during this time. So they have idol worship tree. They have different deities. I'm not saying Israel, but some of the people that are mixed into them. Because remember, those that left potentially were not only Hebrew. What if they married a Hebrew? What if they pretended to be, I can't say Jewish, but of the religion of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? So automatically, they left together. So it makes sense that all of a sudden, when all these things are done, and Moses is not there to govern, that the people would fall back to their old ways. Whether it was the Egyptians' old ways or the people that came in. It could have been some Nubians in there. I don't know. Who knows who exactly was in with that group? And again, how many people were left behind? What we do know is that the people went, well, again, from the Bible, from this historical document that we call the Bible, the people went back to their old ways. So Moses goes back up, gets new 10 Commandments, and teaches them. But this is the interesting part. I said it was going to be interesting. What's interesting, 40 years. Now, there's different translations that actually have different timelines of how long they were actually in the wilderness. But it says, as per our translation, 40 years. So 40 years they're in the wilderness. Why? Because all those that were older, and at this time you didn't live to 100 anymore. I mean, some people would, but not as many. The older generations would have died. They would have died, and the younger people, those that were being taught by Moses and their parents after being rebuked and such. But what I'm trying to say is all the things of the past, the different deities, pagan worship, I should say, the Egyptian ways have basically been run out by the elders dying, those that were bringing those traditions. So again, in Jewish tradition, in Christian tradition, this is actually why they wandered around for 40 years. It wasn't just punishment. It was to root out the old ways so that they could actually be the people of God. So they go from Sinai. Now, here's a question, and I bring this up in the curriculum. Were there actually other people in the Sinai area? Yes, there were. So they had a lot of interactions with other people that were in this area. In the curriculum, you'll actually see some of those people. And so that's also very important to understand, is that there were other people in that area while they were there. Did they war with them? Hopefully not. Again, we say hopefully from our point of view. but most likely they did. According to the Bible, there were 2 million people that followed Moses during the Exodus. That's a large amount of people. And interesting enough, you see a city that has 2 million people, you're going to see high rises. You're going to see people living on top of each other. There's no high rises back in the Sinai during the time of Moses. So they were very well spread out. So they took over a large area of the Sinai, which actually would push out people that were in the Sinai. So there was probably a lot of conflicts that were happening because of that. Now, Midians. We talked about the Midians. The Midians live in this area during this time. They would have joined with them? Would they have moved over and made more room for them? Who knows? We do know that, from the Bible at least, that Moses had took the people, the Midianites that were actually part of Jethro's family, and brought them in to to the people that were following him. And so at this point, they had to create a government based on the laws that were given to Moses, according to the Bible, by God. Now, this law, okay, 2 tablets, 10 commandments. I mean, you can't live off a whole civilization off of just 10 rules. No. Those are the foundation of every rule that comes after it. Now, according to the Bible, Moses was at first being the judge of everyone. But then he says, then he's confronted by Jethro. Again, did this actually happen? Not quite sure. But I'm telling you the history as the Hebrews, or as the Israelites and the Jews say. Okay, so now you have, and I probably have some changes, or some differences between Jewish tradition and what I'm teaching. It's the best I can do right now. In the future, I actually hope to have a rabbi who will go through all this and take it from their point of view as well, to give me some more insight. But again, we're supposed to be in 400 pages in our curriculum. We're at 430 pages. We've already exceeded our allotted amount. So yeah, there's not much we can add. So maybe there's something we could take away and change up. I don't know. We'll come to that point when it comes to that point. So this is the best that I can do as a historian that's not a historian of ancient Israel. So I will get extra help later on. Okay, so they create the laws. They create a way of governing the people. They create a tabernacle. So the tabernacle is basically a mobile temple or a place of worship with very strict guidelines. Not just anybody goes in. They also create the Ark of the Covenant. Now, have they ever found the Ark of the Covenant? No, they haven't. Have they found writings about it? Not outside the Bible. Not that I know of. So this is, again, a container that held the 10 commandments, the original documents, and any other documents that they want to put in this. It was designed, according to the Bible, by God and how he wanted it to be presented. And at some point in history, it's going to be taken by the Philistines, and they're going to put it in their temples until eventually the Hebrews will take it back. But this is housed in the tabernacle. This is only to be seen by the priests. And again, it's seen by others during this time, but in the Bible, it talks about how they used it to walk around. The walls of. Man, I hate when I have one of those brain farts and can't think of it. We'll get to it as we get to it. Walk around a large city and blow trumpets to have it come down. It's called Jericho. Thank you. But it is housed in the tabernacle. And the tabernacle is designed, again, according to the Bible, by God. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. Okay. So all during these 40 years, you have people writing. You have people living. They're creating a society. Again, they had 2 million people, according to the Bible, when they left Egypt. They had a lot of them die. How many of them were replaced? Don't know. It actually does say, give a certain amount that's in it, and we're going to discuss in the curriculum the numbers of people. So you'll be able to see some of that. And some of the history of the Sinai and such. I'm giving you the basics. So, okay, I just went to the page on the curriculum that actually talks about the estimated of numbers of the Hebrews that left Exodus. So the book of Exodus states that about 600,000 men left. Well, 600,000 men would mean there would be about 2 million people. 600,000 men, maybe 600,000 women, and about 8,000 or 800,000 children. Something around that. So between 1 and 2 million people left Egypt. Again, as far as we know. This is, again, according to the Bible. Scholars estimate that there, let's see, I'll actually read it here. It says, some scholars propose that the number of Hebrews involved in the Exodus may have been in the tens of thousands rather than the millions. So, how do we know? We don't. All we have is the Bible. The Bible, in the translation that we have, if it's translated correctly, says 2 million. We're not 100% sure. So this will actually go through the numbers and how that the numbers are actually brought together. It also goes through the non-Hebrew slaves that could have joined the Exodus. You have the Canaanites, other Canaanites. You have other incentives for slaves to go. You get a whole bunch of different things. So we actually have an estimate of the amount of non-Hebrews as well that go through, and the archaeological findings when it comes to this. And now it is very sparse when it comes to the archaeological evidence of how many people came, but that's because we don't have many of the documents that were preserved beyond the Bible, or I should stop saying the Bible, the Torah, and what was written in those books, and other books that were written at the same time, being that they have to coincide, being that they're written at the same time that the events are actually happening. Okay, so you can go through all these different things, Mount Sinai and the history behind it, the different people that were there, the archaeological findings that were there. We have it all in the curriculum. We have the geography of it, the roles of the ancient Israelites and their identity to Sinai. So these are, that portion, that section is very fascinating. The people and the tribes. Now here's something that's also very interesting. You had the 12 tribes of Israel. You had the 10 sons, and you had Joseph. But Joseph didn't actually take, there was, I'm trying to say this correctly. There was 10 sons that sold Joseph into Egypt. You had Benjamin, so that's 11 houses. Joseph gave it off to 2 sons, so they give half and half of the kingdom of Joseph to 2 different sons. So 12 being 11 plus 2 halves. But in this group, you also had the Midianites. So you had the Midianites that were part of this group. You have the Amalekites that were in the area. You had the Edomites that were in the area. Again, the area of the Sinai. Like I was saying, there's a lot of different people that were here. You also have the Ishmaelites. That's right. Those of Ishmael, son of Abraham. The 12 tribes of Ishmael. So that's also very cool, interesting, because those people are living there when the Hebrews, the children of who? Of Abraham, come back into Sinai. So you have the Ishmaelites, which is a very important group and may have had some interactions and trade with the Israelites. Ishmaelites, Israelites. Okay. And then you had the Amalekite, Midianite alliance that they had. So you go through all these different things. And a lot of the archaeological findings on these different tribes that were there during the time. Okay. Going forward. Moses. Let's talk about Moses in there. First, he ascends up to meet God. And then he comes back down. Finds out the people are not obeying the laws. The laws that were not established by them yet. So he destroys them. Condemns the people. Or rebukes the people. Rebukes. Better word. Rebukes the people. Goes back in Sinai. Comes back with the 10 Commandments. Okay. Then, and these are long periods of time that he's actually up there. So there's a lot of different parts. You actually learn about the golden calf and why that was important during that time. Um, and then the renewal of the covenants. So these are all different parts you're going to read through the curriculum. Sorry, I'm running through this, just a lot of information. Okay, now, from his Hebrew, calling them Hebrews, the name Hebrews, to Israelites. This is actually when their identity changes. So when they're given their law, which is, again, we can't say all these religious things that happen, whether they happen or not, historically, archaeologically, cannot do it. But we can actually talk about the laws, which were established during this time. So who were the Hebrews? The Hebrews were the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the early term was Hebrews. Abraham, or Abram, becoming Abraham, was their grandfather or great-great-grandfather. So then the name Israel. Well, Jacob, who was the grandson of Abraham, was actually called, when he got his covenant, saying that he would have a plethora of a nation, generations that outnumber the sands of the sea or the stars in the sky. So you actually have his name actually changed to Israel, which means one who struggles with God. That's quite the name if you're a person that believes in God and God is the one governing you, and yet you're called the one that struggles with God. And now I understand that there's actually different translations when it comes to that, but that's the translation that we're going to go with. So you have the 12 tribes of Israel, all living in the Sinai. They are now called, because they have now their laws and are now creating their civilization, are now called Israelites. So this is the point when the Hebrews become Israelites. And before Hebrews, they didn't have a name. They were a family. They were a culture. So, and you can go through the history of Israelites and what it means in the curriculum. Again, I don't have the time. Love to tell you about it, but not as of right now. So some of the holy items that were collected during this time or produced during this time. There's a tabernacle. We've already talked about this. Moses was told what the structure, the layout, what was it supposed to be inside the tabernacle, and the purpose for the tabernacle. All things you can read. The Ark of the Covenant, the construction and design. We already talked about this. The content of the Ark, and the significance of the worship. We tell you all that. So there's other, now this is interesting, there's other sacred furnishings of the tabernacle. This includes the altar for burnt offerings. And this had to travel around. Every time they moved around, they had to bring this around. It's a tabernacle, which is a mobile temple, basically. Mobile worship center. Then you had the bronze basin, which was actually a thing for washing. Yeah, it's the washing of hands and feet before entering the holy place. You had the table of showbread. So inside is loaves of bread that are displayed for each 12 tribe of Israel. The bread is replaced every Sabbath and eaten by the priests. So the priests live off this bread. This bread is known as the bread of presence. Now, the next thing you have is the golden lampstand. It's a menorah. This is like the first time that they talk about the menorah. And it's created for the tabernacle. Later on, to be used in Hanukkah and such. And this does not mean that the menorah was the exact same. Not quite sure. So I'm not going to say whether it was or was not. I just don't remember. But it's also a symbol of enlightenment that comes from God. So that was interesting. And then the last one is the altar of incense. So you have incense that's being burned inside the tabernacle in the Holy of Holies. And this creates an almost veil for the person that's working inside the Holy of Holies. So God could dwell there is the idea behind it. And then you have, and then you had the other things that were specified for the tabernacle. high priest garments, the purpose of the garments. We tell all these different things. So there's a lot of um, religious and significant items in here that you need to know about. So I'm just putting that out there so you can actually see that these are important factors to look at to know the culture of the Israelites. Okay, so then we go into the life in the wilderness, establishing what they call the Mosaic Law. Again, this is another reason why this part is so important historically, because this is when they start to establish their law, their civil and religious guidelines, establishing the tabernacle, organizing their camps. Again, the 12 tribes, divided by 12 tribes. The leadership roles in each of those tribes. The provisions and manna when that comes through. Again, that's more of a religious part. But this is some of the things. Now, in the curriculum, I actually we put down 3 different reasons for wandering for 40 years. The one that I talked about was just one of them. It also, read it. You'll get more. One of the big reasons, though, they're planning to go back into Canaan. They're going to go back to the land that they came from, back in the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they sent spies down there. And according to the spies, some of them, not all of them, there were 2 that didn't agree with what was said by the other spies. But the other spies said, it's a place of milk and honey. But 10 of the spies returned with fearful reports of strengthening about the strength of the inhabitants, causing panic among the people. So because of that, they didn't go into that land. So that was one of the other reasons for it. But you're going to learn about some of the other reasons as well. So continue to read in the curriculum. These are all fascinating things. Really, whether you're religious or not, just reading these things gets you a really good understanding of who the Israelites were, where they came from, and why they have certain laws. We have, again, the history behind the Moses and the writing of the Torah. So you know how I had notes? I usually have notes because I don't want to go through every single point of this. It's just reminding me all the fascinating things that are in the curriculum. So I want to say all these different things. So Moses as the author of the Torah, and it goes through all the different parts that he was writing down, where the oral traditions were. So it's really fascinating. I already went over it basically early on. So you can read some more on that. And then you go into the normal things, the archaeological findings, the vocabulary and such. So I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot for you to learn about when it comes to Sinai. This was a very essential part of the history of Israel. So did they actually come from Egypt? Good chance. Is it 100%? Not 100%. Do I believe it? I do. So that being said, this is a really good way of understanding who they were, what they went through, and such. During Sinai, we talked about, on Tuesday, we talked about being in Egypt and why that was important. So this part is also very important because this is where the laws came from. This is basically where the foundation of Israel comes from. The foundation of everything before it would be more like the foundation of the Hebrews. Now, same people, just those are all things that were written down after the fact. Everything from the time of Mount Sinai on is during the fact, during that time. Now, here's another interesting thing. There is actually ideas out there, I won't say theories, ideas out there, that there were actually other books that were written at the same time as the Torah. Jewish tradition has a lot of books when it comes to what was happening during that time. I don't have access to those books. I would love to have access to some of the writings that they have of their ancient times. At some point, I'd love to be able to read some of that. But as you know, some of the things have been destroyed over time. We talked about that, I think, Tuesday as well. So if you haven't read about it, if you haven't learned about how their history was preserved, go back to yesterday, or go back to Tuesday's podcast. It'll tell you a lot about that. So, other than that, thank you so much for joining me on this great Adventure Box podcast day. And we will catch you next week. Because today's Thursday, we don't do a Friday. We do have a Stump the Creator for historical conquest, but not something that comes with the history, of ancient civilizations, or American history. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Take care. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.